Most of my projects involve repurposed and reused materials. I find materials in dumpsters, at Goodwill, on Craigslist, and from around my home. This cable spool that I turned into a coffee table is from a construction dump site. This cutting board I laser cut the pietà into is from Goodwill. These wine crates I turned into a table are from Craigslist. The legs are made from wood I found in my garage. The fabric of my backpack is from Goodwill. The straps were cut off an old ripped backpack of my sister's that she was throwing away. The inside is muslin drop cloth that we use to paint the walls of our house. Oh, and this leather strap is repurposed from one of my own projects when I tried to make a laser-cut leather wallet and failed miserably. See? Even mistakes can be given purpose. Repurposing and reusing items has the dual benefit of helping to save money while also helping the environment. I love finding purpose in old, broken, and discarded objects. And finding meaning in our lives leads to a better life. There was a new study published last month in Psychological Science, and it was on subjective well-being around the world. Trends and predictors across the lifespan. The researchers examined 4 important predictors of subjective well-being and how their associations changed. The factors were marriage, employment, pro-sociality, and life meaning. These predictors were typically associated with higher subjective well-being over the lifespan in every world region. The most consistent predictor was life meaning, which had strong, consistent associations with all subjective well-being measures across regions and age. Okay, so we know that life meaning is great, that it improves our well-being. But how do we find meaning in our own lives? As Mark Manson put it, we exist on this earth for some undetermined period of time. During that time we do things. Some of these things are important, some of them are unimportant. And those important things give our lives meaning and happiness. So when people say, "What should I do with my life?" or "What is my life purpose?" what they're actually asking is, what can I do with my time that is important? How we go about finding the answer to this question is just, if not more important than the answer itself. There are 2 main things to avoid when searching for purpose: self-absorption and the pursuit of happiness. Let's start with self-absorption. We must try to avoid turning this pursuit, the pursuit of meaning, into a self-focused spiral. So much of our time is spent in self-focused ways. What happens if I do this or that? We have doubt and fear and self-judgment, and we pin ourselves up against others. But there's a paradox. All of this self-focus is not very good for us. Studies show that self-absorption is associated with clinical depression, personality disorders, and anxiety. Okay, so how do we avoid this? Aristotle wrote that in order to have a meaningful life, one must strive for arete, which is excellence or mastery. To achieve arete, one must throw oneself fully into a work of art, intellect, athletics, and so on. Which, as we all know, is not always pleasant. A virtuous life, he wrote, requires exertion and does not consist in amusement. Which leads us to our second point, the pursuit of happiness. We cannot find purpose. We cannot live fulfilled lives by constantly striving to be happy. Alan Watts referred to this as the backwards law, which is the idea that the more you pursue feeling better all the time, the less satisfied you become, as pursuing something only reinforces the fact that you lack it in the first place. The desire for more positive experiences in and of itself is a negative experience, and, paradoxically, accepting one's negative experiences can actually be a positive one. In case you haven't figured it out already, no one feels happy all the time. Sadness, suffering, is inevitable. The pursuit of meaning and the pursuit of happiness are not synonymous. The embodiment of the pursuit of happiness is through the avoidance of suffering. This is something that everyone should understand. No one can avoid pain forever. Suffering is inevitable, and that is not in and of itself a bad thing. No matter what you do, you will experience negative emotions at some point in your life. The point isn't to avoid this. It's not to avoid this suffering. The point is to find the suffering that you enjoy dealing with. Nietzsche wrote, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." If you have your why, if you have your meaning, your purpose, your passion, then you can bear almost any how. Then you can bear suffering or discomfort or pain. Everything involves sacrifice. Everything includes some sort of cost. Nothing is positive all the time. So the question is, what struggle or sacrifice are you willing to tolerate? What can I do with my time that is important? In his first book, Mark Manson writes that everything worthwhile in life is won through surmounting the associated negative experience. Any attempt to escape the negative, to avoid it, or quash it, or silence it, only backfires. The avoidance of suffering is a form of suffering. The avoidance of struggle is a struggle. The denial of failure is a failure. Hiding what is shameful is, in itself, a form of shame. Pain is an inextricable thread in the fabric of life, and to tear it out is not only impossible, but destructive. Attempting to tear it out unravels everything else with it. Not only is suffering inevitable, but it is also not a bad thing. We suffer for the simple reason that suffering is biologically useful. It is nature's preferred agent for inspiring change. We have evolved to always live with a certain degree of dissatisfaction and insecurity, because it's the mildly dissatisfied and insecure creatures that's going to do the most work to innovate and survive. That adversity and failure are actually useful and even necessary for developing strong-minded and successful adults. The other week, I was listening to the speech Bobby Kennedy gave after the assassination of MLK. In it, he quoted the poetry of Aeschylus. "Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until, in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." So what does this mean? How do we find purpose in our lives and in the world around us? How do we find our why to live? If Nietzsche is right, and he who has a why to live can bear almost any how, if we don't yet know our why, if we don't yet know our meaning or our purpose, then perhaps we can start with the how. Ask yourself, what am I willing to suffer for? What is the how that I am willing to bear? What is the how that I want to bear? My sister is a Division I college athlete. She's fantastic at basketball. What makes her so good? The hours and hours she has spent honing her craft. She loves the physical and mental strain of the sport. That is the suffering she chose, and she's better for it. For me, I love to create. I spend countless hours painting, sewing, sanding, gluing, building, and it's not always easy. Honestly, I spend just as much, if not more, of my time fixing mistakes than I do making them in the first place. It is not always comfortable and is rarely easy, but creating, finding purpose for old or discarded objects, it helps me find fulfillment. Avoiding things because they're hard or because they make us uncomfortable, it's not the answer. So ask yourself what struggle or sacrifice you're willing to tolerate. What can you do with your time that is important to you? If you can answer that, and if you have the strength to pursue it. If you can take the focus off yourself, off pursuing happiness and avoiding suffering, well, then you will have found your purpose.